The life of Prince Philip, husband of Queen Elizabeth II for more than 70 years, was marked by numerous tragic episodes. His family was exiled. His mother was institutionalized in a psychiatric facility when he was still very young, while his father moved to the French Riviera, where he began living with his mistress. Additionally, in a short period of time, all his sisters got married, leaving him alone from a very young age. Among the most painful stories of his life, the one about his sister Cecilia stands out. She was the sister he loved the most. Few names in European royal history carry as much duality as that of Cecilia of Greece and Denmark. Born into one of the most powerful dynasties on the continent, her life promised to be marked by privilege, luxury, and stability. However, destiny had a very different path in store for her. Amidst exiles, family tragedies, and political turmoil, she became an emotionally significant figure for her siblings, especially for the youngest, Prince Philip, the future Duke of Edinburgh. But it was an airplane crash, which took her life and the lives of her entire family, that cemented her story as one of the most striking and tragic in European monarchy. Today we will delve into the life of Cecilie of Greece and Denmark. She was the daughter of Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark and Princess Alice of Battenberg, born on June 22, 1911, in the majestic Tatoi Palace near Athens. From birth, she carried the grandeur of a cosmopolitan and powerful lineage. Cecilia was born into one of Europe's most influential dynasties, the House of Glucksburg, which ruled Greece, Denmark, and other nations. Her father, Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark, was the son of King George I of Greece, a Danish monarch who established the Greek dynasty, and Queen Olga, granddaughter of Tsar Nicholas I of Russia. On her mother's side, Cecilia also had a direct connection to British and German aristocracy. Her mother, Princess Alice of Battenberg, was the great-granddaughter of Queen Victoria of the United Kingdom. She was also the granddaughter of Grand Duke Louis IV of Hesse, which placed Cecilia in familial relation to figures such as Tsar Nicholas II of Russia and Lord Mountbatten, a British military strategist. On July 10th, the young girl was baptized with great pomp and tradition, having as godparents illustrious figures such as King George V of the United Kingdom and Ernest Louis, Grand Duke of Hesse, among others. Cecilia grew up in a vibrant and close-knit home alongside her older sisters, Margarita and Theodora, and later her younger sister, Sophie. Her father, Prince Andrew, had a special affection for her, and this bond was reflected in the family moments they shared in the lush gardens of Tatoi, Mont Repos in Corfu, and the palace corridors. Despite belonging to a royal family, Cecilia's childhood was not only about luxury. Her mother, Alice, ensured she received a solid and cosmopolitan education. At home, they spoke English, French, German, and Greek, languages that Cecilia mastered with the fluency typical of her multicultural background. Traveling was a constant part of her life. From a young age, Cecilia accompanied her family on visits to the United Kingdom and Germany, where she met her mother's influential relatives. She was introduced to grand salons and carefully maintained gardens, but she also absorbed the tense atmosphere of a transforming Europe. Cecilia's childhood was marked by Greece's political instability between 1912 and 1913, as the country became involved in the Balkan Wars. Her father served in the army, and her mother worked as a nurse, caring for wounded soldiers. Despite their efforts to shield their children from the harsh realities of war, the conflict was a constant shadow. The most terrifying moment came in 1916, when the French Navy bombarded the royal palace of Athens. Cecilia, only 5 years old at the time, witnessed chaos and fear up close, experiences that would shape her worldview. The situation only worsened in 1917 when King Constantine I, Cecilia's uncle, was deposed. Her family was forced into exile, leaving Athens and finding refuge in Switzerland, where they began living in modest hotels. A major change for someone who had once lived surrounded by wealth. In the city of Lucerne, they tried to rebuild a routine, but a sense of uncertainty loomed over everyone as they faced exile. The family also suffered from the tragedies that echoed across the continent. The Russian Revolution of 1917 brought devastating news. Close relatives of the Romanov family, including Cecilia's cousins, were brutally murdered. The fall of the German dynasties in 1918 further increased the weight of instability that the family carried. Cecilia's health began to deteriorate. In 1920, she contracted influenza and scarlet fever, illnesses that threatened her life. Fortunately, she recovered and was able to enjoy brief moments of relief during a few family reunions. She reunited with her paternal grandmother, the Queen, who had escaped the Bolsheviks thanks to diplomatic assistance. On another occasion, she met her Aunt Louise and her Uncle Louis Mountbatten. These meetings, although brief, provided a glimpse of normalcy amidst so much chaos. Despite difficult times, Cecilia found joy in the bonds she strengthened with her younger sister, Sophie. Together, they explored the mountainous landscapes of Switzerland on long walks that allowed them, even if only for a moment, to escape their worries. On October 2, 1920, an unusual incident forever changed the course of the Greek royal family. King Alexander I, Cecilia's cousin, was bitten by a pet monkey during a walk at the Tatoi Palace. The poorly treated wound developed into septicemia, which proved fatal. On October 25th, he died alone, without any family members being allowed to see him in his final moments. This tragic loss triggered a violent institutional crisis in Greece. The country, already engulfed in war against Turkey since 1919, plunged further into political chaos. Prime Minister Eleftherios Venizelos lost the legislative elections and, humiliated, withdrew into exile. A referendum restored King Constantine I, Cecilia's uncle, to the throne. For the family, it seemed like the beginning of new stability, but the reality would be quite different. On November 23, 1920, Prince Andrew was welcomed in Athens as a hero. A few days later, Alice and her 4 daughters, Margarita, Theodora, Cecilia, and Sophie, joined him. The family settled once again in Corfu, at the beloved Monrepo Palace. Meanwhile, some joyful news arrived. Alice was pregnant again. On June 10, 1921, Philip was born, the youngest of the family, who would later become the iconic Duke of Edinburgh. The baby's arrival brought moments of happiness for Cecilia and her sisters, who devoted themselves to caring for and playing with him. However, the absence of Andrew, who had departed to lead Greek forces in the war in Asia Minor, cast a shadow over these happy days. Despite the uncertainties, Cecilia and her sisters enjoyed moments of relative peace at the palace. In 1922, they received a visit from their maternal grandmother and their Aunt Louise, who brought stories and gifts to ease tensions. The palace, with its beautiful gardens and ancient ruins, became a place of great adventures. It was known that the site had once been an ancient cemetery, which sparked the princess's interest in archaeology. In the grounds near the palace, they discovered ceramic pieces, bronze artifacts, and even human bones. Those simple joys contrasted with the duties of her royal position. In March 1921, Cecilia and her sisters attended the wedding of their cousin Elena to the Crown Prince of Romania in Athens. A few months later, they traveled to the United Kingdom to be bridesmaids at the wedding of their uncle, Louis Mountbatten and Edwina Ashley. Edwina, with her elegance and beauty, left Cecilia fascinated, offering her a glimpse of the glamour and sophistication that awaited her in the future. However, the relative peace was abruptly interrupted by Greece's defeat in the war against Turkey. In September 1922, King Constantine abdicated, ceding the throne to his eldest son, George VI. Just a month later, Prince Andrew, Cecilia's father, was arrested, accused of being responsible for the defeat at the Battle of Sakarya. Taken to a military tribunal, he faced the possibility of execution. It was only thanks to the intervention of foreign diplomats that he narrowly escaped death, instead being sentenced to exile and stripped of all his military rights. In early December 1922, the family fled Greece in haste aboard the British ship HMS Calypso. With few belongings, they left behind their homeland and the dream of stability. Cecilia, still very young, at only 12 years old, saw her world fall apart once again as the future became uncertain. After leaving Greece in a hurry in December 1922, the Greek royal family found themselves without a homeland, without a clear destination, and worse still, without money. For weeks, Cecilia, her parents, and her siblings wandered between Italy, France, and the United Kingdom, seeking support from relatives and acquaintances. Finally, in 1923, they found refuge in Saint-Cloud, an elegant suburb of Paris. However, even though they had a roof over their heads, the house did not belong to them. They settled in a residence adjacent to that of Marie Bonaparte, the wealthy and eccentric princess who, driven by affection and perhaps a sense of duty, took the family under her protection. For 7 years, she ensured the subsistence of Cecilia and her siblings. She provided the girls with paid schooling and second-hand clothes donated by another generous aunt, Lady Louise Mountbatten. However, these used garments were not simple hand-me-downs. They were luxurious dresses that had once graced the grand halls of British nobility, but now arrived patched up in the hands of the exiled young women. Poverty was not an abstract concept for Cecilia. She grew up watching her parents struggle to maintain appearances while carefully counting every franc and avoiding any discussion of money in front of their children. In March 1924, Cecilia and her family were officially stripped of their Greek citizenship with the proclamation of the Second Hellenic Republic, becoming stateless. Salvation came from King Christian X of Denmark, a distant cousin, who granted them Danish passports. Still, the royal identity that she once carried with pride was increasingly becoming a burden of a distant past. Despite these hardships, the family maintained strong ties with their relatives scattered across Europe. In 1923, Cecilia traveled to London to be a bridesmaid at the wedding of her aunt Louise Mountbatten to the future Gustav VI Adolf of Sweden. 2 years later, she returned to the United Kingdom to attend the funeral of Queen Alexandra, her great-aunt. At 17 years old, Cecilia made her debut in British high society. It was the summer of 1928, and the young princess attended her first grand ball under the watchful eyes of counts, dukes, and even King George V himself. In the days that followed, she participated in exclusive events and spent a few days at Balmoral Castle in Scotland at the king's invitation. Cecilia was considered the most beautiful of Prince Andrew and Princess Alice's daughters. Her maternal grandmother, the Dowager Marchioness of Milford Haven, believed she had a promising future. However, while her older sisters remained unmarried, a direct consequence of the family's financial situation, the search for a good match for Cecilia became a priority. There was a plan to arrange her marriage to Frederick, Crown Prince of Denmark, but the negotiations failed. Nevertheless, her destiny was already written. Georg Donatus, Prince of Hesse, was a longtime acquaintance of the family. Cecilia had known him since childhood, and by 1929, their childhood affection blossomed into romance. In early 1930, when she was 18 and he was 23, They were unofficially engaged. The marriage seemed like the perfect outcome for the young princess. However, while she envisioned a bright future, a terrible drama was unfolding within her own home. Her mother, Princess Alice, suffered increasingly intense mental breakdowns. The breaking point came shortly after her silver wedding anniversary with Prince Andrew in 1928. The princess began to believe she had healing powers, claimed to receive divine messages, and even insisted that she was the bride of Jesus Christ. Her visions led her to erratic behavior, plunging the entire family into despair. Faced with this situation, Prince Andrew made a painful but necessary decision. During a trip to Darmstadt in April 1930, to celebrate Cecilia's engagement to Georg Donatus, he carried out a secret plan. Taking advantage of the occasion, he arranged for Alice to be forcibly committed to a sanatorium in Switzerland. Cecilia saw her mother being taken away against her will. There were no farewells, no explanations, only a heavy silence that enveloped the entire family. The young princess's life seemed to be moving in two opposite directions. On one side, there was romance and the promise of marriage to Georg Donatus, a bright future in Hesse, a new royal house, a fresh start. On the other side, there was the weight of family tragedy, a mother locked away, a distant father, and a past full of uncertainties that never fully left her. At that moment, she could not have known, but this was only the beginning of a story that, despite moments of happiness, would be marked by tragedies. The spring of 1930 brought with it promises of love and change for Cecilia of Greece and Denmark. Almost at the same time that she became engaged to Georg Donatus, Prince of Hesse, her younger sister Sophie also became engaged to Christoph of Hesse, Georg's cousin. Fate united the sisters not only by blood, but also through marriage into the same noble lineage. Wedding preparations took over the household. Cecilia and Sophie traveled to London, where they selected refined fabrics and stunning dresses. Shortly afterward, they returned to Paris, where they finalized their trousseau and ordered their wedding gowns. On December 15, 1930, Sophie, the youngest sister, was the first to marry. In an elegant hotel in Kronberg, she wed Prince Christoph of Hesse at the age of 16. Christoph was closely involved with the Nazi government and even served in the Ministry of the Air Force under the Third Reich. Together, they had 5 children. However, in 1943, Christoph died in a plane crash in Italy. Years later, Sophie remarried Prince Georg Wilhelm of Hanover. Her marriage was initially rejected by King George VI due to the ongoing war between the United Kingdom and Germany. Defying the crown, she proceeded with the union and had 3 more children. Sophie passed away on November 3, 2001, at the age of 87. The eldest sister, Margarita, also married a German prince, a descendant of Queen Victoria, in April 1931 and had 6 children, though her first daughter was stillborn. Margarita outlived her husband by 21 years and was the godmother of Anne, the only daughter of her brother, Prince Philip. She passed away in 1981 at the age of 86. The second sister, Theodora, also married in 1931, tying the knot with Berthold of Baden, her second cousin, with whom she had 3 children. During a difficult period in his childhood, their brother Philip lived with her after their mother was institutionalized. Like her sisters, Theodora also maintained ties to German aristocracy, which left her legacy tainted by associations with Nazism. She passed away in 1969 at the age of 63, just 5 weeks before her mother, Princess Alice. All the sisters married in a short span of time, between 1930 and 1931. However, their mother, Princess Alice, was absent from all of their weddings. And although they had served as bridesmaids at their uncle Louis Mountbatten's wedding, They were not invited to their brother Philip's wedding to Princess Elizabeth in 1947 due to their connections with Nazism. Even Prince Philip, who had served in the British Royal Navy during World War II, had to face his own brothers-in-law on the battlefield. But let us return to the story of our protagonist, Cecilia, and her grand day. Her wedding took place on February 2nd, 1931, in the majestic Neues Palais in Darmstadt. To the surprise of foreign guests, the German people's reception of the deposed royal family was warm. Crowds gathered in the streets to celebrate the newlyweds, applauding and cheering for the former royal house of Hesse. After the wedding, Cecilia and her husband settled in the official residence of the Grand Duke. Although their life was more modest than what a princess might have expected, Cecilia seemed happy. She dedicated herself to philanthropic work, assuming the presidency of an association focused on women's rights. Then came their children. Prince Ludwig was born in October 1931, followed by Prince Alexander in April 1933, and their youngest daughter, Princess Johanna, in September 1936. Cecilia was a loving and devoted mother, passing down to her children the values she had learned in her own childhood, despite the hardships she had faced. However, something deeply troubled her: the situation of her mother, who remained distant from everyone, confined against her will. Cecilia wrote letters, sent photos of her children, and tried to maintain a connection. But Alice, feeling betrayed by what she perceived as her family's abandonment, refused to accept any contact. It is said that in a fit of rage, she tore apart a photograph that Cecilia had sent her shortly after the birth of Ludwig, her first child. It was only in 1933, after long years of confinement, that Alice was finally released. But instead of running into the arms of her children, she chose isolation. Her daughter Cecilia persisted, continuing to send letters and photos until, in December 1936, Princess Alice decided to re-establish contact. Cecilia was the first person in the family she reached out to. The reunion between mother and daughter took place in the spring of 1937. Georg Donatus and his brother Louis joined the Nazi Party shortly after, and Cecilia followed the same path. The decision was political and strategic. With the monarchy abolished, integrating into the regime was the only way to maintain some status within Nazi Germany. Meanwhile, the Greek monarchy was experiencing turbulent changes. General Georgios Kondylis overthrew the republic in 1935, and through a referendum, the population reinstated the monarchy. As a result, the banishment sentence of Prince Andrew, Cecilia's father, was revoked in 1936, allowing the family to return to Greece after 14 years in exile. On November 16, 1937, the atmosphere in Frankfurt was heavy with damp cold, a prelude to the harsh European winter. Cecilia of Greece and Denmark, then 8 months pregnant, was dressed in black, as she always did when flying. She had never liked flying. There was something about the idea of being suspended in the air between the sky and the earth that unsettled her. But family duty prevailed. Her brother-in-law, Prince Louis of Hesse, was about to be married, and her presence, along with that of her family, was expected in London. Traveling with her were her husband, her young sons Ludwig, age 6, and Alexander, aged 4, as well as her mother-in-law, the Dowager Grand Duchess Eleanor. The group was also accompanied by Baron Joachim Riedesel, who had been chosen as the wedding's godfather, and a lady-in-waiting. The journey was expected to be smooth, with a brief stop in Belgium to pick up 2 additional passengers before continuing to England. The takeoff went smoothly, and the plane flew steadily over Europe. However, as they approached the North Sea, a dense fog began to surround the aircraft. The pilot maintained course and attempted to land at the Belgian airport, but visibility was almost non-existent. He proceeded with the descent regardless. A fatal decision. No one knows exactly what happened inside the cockpit at that moment, but records indicate that the plane collided with a factory chimney, destroying one wing and one of the engines. Out of control, the aircraft crashed violently onto the roof of a building before plunging several meters and exploding into flames. There were no survivors. Later, when rescue teams arrived at the crash site, they discovered a horrifying detail. Among the charred bodies, there was a newborn. Evidence suggests that Cecilie went into labor during the flight and gave birth to a baby who never had the chance to take a breath of fresh air. A newborn perished along with its mother and the rest of the family, adding even more horror and sorrow to Cecilia's tragic end. The news spread quickly, and London was overcome with grief. The wedding of Louis of Hesse and Margaret Campbell Geddes, scheduled for November 17, 1937, was already prepared when guests began receiving news of the accident. It was too late to cancel. Nobles from all over Europe had gathered, dressed in gala attire, in a celebration that could no longer be called a festivity. With tear-filled eyes, Louis and Margaret exchanged their vows in one of the saddest weddings in European aristocratic history, taking place just one day after the tragedy. The next day, the newlyweds traveled to Belgium to retrieve the remains of Cecilie and her family from a civil hospital in Ostend. What was meant to be the beginning of their honeymoon and new life together turned into a harrowing pilgrimage of corpse identification and repatriation. The only survivor of the family tragedy was little Princess Johanna. Too young to travel, she had stayed home. Now orphaned, she was adopted by the newlyweds Louis and Margaret. But as if a cruel fate haunted the family, Johanna died just 2 years later, on July 14, 1939, from meningitis at the age of 3. Darmstadt was the stage for a funeral event that brought the city to a standstill. Thousands of people gathered to pay their final respects to the Hesse family. But amid the grief over the loss of that young family, there was an unsettling presence. Nazi troops, dressed in immaculate uniforms, marched through the streets, using the funeral as a display of power. Hitler's regime, which was already consolidating its influence in Germany, knew how to capitalize on the tragedy for its own benefit. Among those present, an unexpected reunion took place. Prince Andrew and Princess Alice, Cecilia's parents, came face to face for the first time in 6 years. The tragedy brought them together momentarily, but there was no true reconciliation. Andrew would continue his life separately, while Alice, deeply affected by her daughter's death, found a new purpose. The pain that had once kept her imprisoned in a world of illusions now set her free. Her mental health improved drastically, and after the funeral, she never again showed signs of instability. After the ceremony, the bodies of Cecilie and her family were taken to their final resting place in the Grand Ducal Mausoleum of Rosenhohe. Their tombstones were placed side by side. And so ended the story of another tragic princess, one who grew up without a kingdom but found love in the midst of exile. She had children and lived moments of happiness. Today, few remember Cecilie. Her name occasionally appears in biographies of her mother, Princess Alice, or of her more famous brother, Prince Philip. But her face remains frozen in time, in faded photographs that tell the story of a woman who had everything and lost everything, all before reaching the age of 27.